The Browns were once the epitome of alternative love, a family founded on the principles of plural marriage. For years, millions of viewers tuned in to see the sister wives experiment play out. A man, Kody Brown, and his 4 wives juggling life, love, and religion under one roof. But beneath the smiles, beneath the dinner table gatherings and reality TV lights, a tempest was growing. A storm that nobody could see coming would erupt into lawsuits, betrayals, and ultimately the ruination of all the things Kody said he believed in. The teaser to this tale starts not with romance, but with a letter, fat, heavy, and marked with force. Hand-delivered on a still morning in Flagstaff, it bore one name, Kody Brown. Within, his universe collapsed. Janelle Brown, the wife he had believed would never betray him, had sued him. This was more than a legal maneuver. It was a war declaration. For years, Janelle had suffered, giving up on her own aspirations, submitting under the burden of Kody's choices, watching him invest his heart and the family fortune in his affair with Robyn. She had endured being shoved to the side, her voice muffled, her children's needs forgotten. But now, her tolerance had expired. This lawsuit was her voice, clear and unmistakable, and it was the first chink in the empire of sister wives. But if Kody believed Janelle's betrayal was the worst part of it all, he was mistaken. Because the biggest knife came from the one person he trusted the most, Robyn Brown. For years, Robyn was the favorite, the wife at his side, the woman who could do nothing wrong in his mind. The others would whisper about favoritism, unequal treatment, but Kody turned a blind eye. He thought Robyn was loyal, pure, and honest. And then came the proof. Court papers showed that Robyn had been deceiving the family all along. Funds that were supposed to be divided had supposedly been diverted, enriching her and her children at the expense of the other wives who were fighting to get by. What on television had been portrayed as innocence and love was now being revealed as manipulation and dishonesty. Fans gasped, the courtroom shook. And Kody, he seethed. He pounded his hands, yelled his innocence, and pointed at everyone but himself. But the reality could not be denied. The wives that he had manipulated, neglected, and underestimated were now standing against him. Christine, the wife who had already departed, returned, not to make amends but to testify. Her testimony was biting, concise, and poignant. She wrote of years of favoritism, of years spent observing Kody disregard her children while showering gifts and attention on Robyn's. Meri, who had been quiet so long, finally snapped too. Sobbing tears, she admitted how small she had felt, how unworthy she had been made to feel she was. And now, standing with Christine and Janelle, she announced that the truth could no longer be concealed. And so, Robyn was gone. The woman who had vowed loyalty until the end, the woman that Kody had given up everything for, turned her back. She stepped away, saying she had done what she needed to do to save her children. But in doing so, she left Kody by himself, vulnerable and helpless. The courtroom was turned into a theater of betrayal. Kody, who was the king of his home, sat like a dethroned emperor, stripped of his crown. The gavel of the judge rang out like a hammer that sealed his fate. The charges were not merely about money. They were about emotional abuse, neglect, and the erosion of trust. The world got to see Kody for the first time, not as the charismatic leader of sister wives, but as an egotistical man brought down by his ego, brought down by the people he believed he could control. His wives were no longer mute. They were warriors, standing in the very same courtroom where their voices could at last be heard. Picture it, Janelle emerging from that courtroom, shoulders squared, head held high. Christine, by her side, unyielding and without apology. Even Meri, the most hurt of them all, now strong at last. And in their wake, Robyn, once Kody's best friend, now a specter of loyalty, disappearing into her own narrative. This wasn't a lawsuit. This was the end of a dynasty. The end of sister wives. The end of Kody Brown's fantasy of control. But the tale doesn't conclude on one gavel drop. Because what do you have when a family that has been built on trust loses that very thing? What do you get when secrets come spilling out, when betrayals are uncovered, and when the truth is louder than the lies? The answer is here, in this saga of love turned bitter, loyalty turned to treachery, and unity born not from faith, but from pain. It is the story of Janelle's courage, Christine's strength, Meri's awakening, and Robyn's betrayal. And at the center of it all, Kody, the man who thought he could never lose, now left with nothing. The day started normally. The Arizona sun was rising, casting gold light across the sleeping streets of Flagstaff. Birds sang, the neighbors brought out their newspapers, and the buzz of another day filtered in. But for one family, the day would not be like any other. For one man, it would signal the start of the end. His name was Kody Brown. For years he had existed in the public eye, flaunting his polygamous marriage before the world through the lens of sister wives. He enjoyed the attention, the opportunity to be perceived as a strong leader of an unorthodox family. He preferred to imagine himself as untouchable, a man who could warp his home, his wives, and even his finances to suit his desires. But that very thing he had spent so long building, a family empire on and off screen, a family was about to become his worst nightmare. That still morning, a knock resounded down the corridors of his house. It was sharp, aggressive, not the sort of knock that was a friendly neighbor or a casual delivery. No, this was official. This was final. As Kody opened the door, a grim-faced courier greeted him. In silence, the man delivered a heavy envelope, its seal bearing witness to the imprimatur of the courts. Kody accepted it, scowling, his brain racing. His heart hammered against his ribs with an odd feeling of foreboding, though he did not yet understand why. He had detractors, certainly. Fans had malignantly criticized him. Ex-wives had dumped him. But legal documents, that was unusual. He ripped the envelope open, fingers shaking just a little, and read. The room around him blurred. The words jumped off the page, one more crushing than the next. Plaintiff, Janelle Brown. Defendant, Kody Brown. Allegations, financial misconduct, manipulation, and reckless management of communally held assets. His breath was stuck in his throat. Janelle, the woman he had always characterized as steady, rational, the sole wife who never made a scene, who silently balanced the family accounts, who made sacrifices for the children without expecting much in return. Janelle had always been practical, nearly businesslike in her attitude towards their marriage. He had never thought she would turn against him. And yet, there it was. Her bold, defiant signature at the bottom of the lawsuit. Kody took a step back, the papers shaking in his hands. His thoughts ran over years of memories. Janelle sitting at the kitchen table counting numbers. Janelle gently taking care of the children, as he pursued Robyn. Janelle's soft sighs when she was not included in the big decisions. He had paid no mind to them, writing off her emotions as inconsequential. Wasn't she, after all, the wife who never rocked the boat? But now the tide had come in, it appeared, and Janelle was going to drown him in facts. The suit was more than ink on paper. It was a chronology of betrayals, broken vows, and undisclosed truths. Janelle's attorneys had detailed it all. How Kody had supposedly diverted money from all the wives into business that benefited Robyn. How assets were distributed unevenly. How equality promises had been smoke and mirrors. The report even had receipts and bank transfers. The sort of cold hard facts that could not be shoveled under the rug as just feelings. Janelle hadn't just complained. She'd shown up armed for battle. And that was what scared Kody the most. He collapsed into a chair, the envelope still in his lap. The walls of the house seemed to shut in on him. He considered the cameras, the way this would appear to the public, the way his detractors, both inside and outside the family, would gorge on this news like vultures fighting over carrion. He could already hear Christine's voice ringing in his mind, acrid and venomous. I told you this would happen. He could envision Meri's eyes, tired and puffy, as if she had recognized that this was coming. And Robyn? Oh Robyn, what would she have to say? All along, Kody had rationalized everything by claiming Robyn required him most, that she was his soulmate, the one wife who comprehended him. He had invested money, affection, and attention in her home, while the others struggled to make ends meet. And now, because of those decisions, he was being led into court. Janelle's decision to file suit wasn't reckless. No, This was years in the making. She had sat by, silently, while her children's needs were ignored. She had witnessed Kody brush off her needs, telling her that Robyn's needs were greater, that Robyn needed more. She had bitten her tongue when family financial discussions always seemed to favor Robyn. But now she was tired of biting her tongue. Her message was plain. Enough is enough. Word of the lawsuit quickly spread. In hours, fans were abuzz on social media. Online headlines appeared. Janelle Brown files shocking lawsuit against Kody. Family empire in jeopardy. Sister wives blows up. Court documents reveal betrayal and manipulation. Public opinion was already rendering its verdict. To some, Janelle was the heroine, had finally stood up to the man who had kept her quiet for so long. To others, she was the betrayer, destroying the family with her choice. But wherever you were, one thing was certain: this lawsuit was going to reveal secrets everyone wasn't ready to hear. Within the confines of her own home, Janelle remained quiet after submitting the papers. She was not gloating. She was not smiling. The burden of what she had just done rested heavily upon her shoulders. There was, however, relief. For the first time in years, she felt as if she had regained command of her life. This isn't about revenge, she repeated softly to herself. It's about truth. Her kids stood behind her. They had witnessed the inequality. They had experienced the pangs of being treated as second-rate to Robyn's children. They embraced her, stood with her, and told her she wasn't by herself. That was what gave Janelle the power, knowing that she wasn't battling for herself alone. She was battling for them. Meanwhile, in Kody's house, panic turned to rage. He stormed through the halls, papers clutched in his hand, shouting about betrayal, about loyalty, about how no one understood the sacrifices he had made. Robyn tried to calm him, her voice trembling as she said, "We'll figure this out." But even she knew, this was bigger than them. The lawsuit wasn't merely a fissure in the foundation, it was an earthquake, and its aftershocks would rock every aspect of their existence. And so, Session 1 concludes, not with closure, but with turmoil. The sets are in place. Janelle versus Kody. A courtroom showdown that will reveal the truth. A family torn apart like never before. The dramatic hand delivery of those court documents was greater than the start of a court battle. It was the start of the end. And as Kody sat in his chair, face flushed with anger, and Janelle stood her ground, ready to battle, one thing was sure: the whispers had always lingered, even before the lawsuit, even before the cameras recorded every fight and every cry. The wives had suspected something. Christine had come out and said it. Kody always favors Robyn. Meri had hinted at it, her tone muted and resigned. And Janelle, well, Janelle had held her suspicions close to herself, keeping them on mental shelves like puzzle pieces she couldn't fit together. But when the lawsuit made it into the courtroom, those puzzle pieces began taking shape and creating a picture that could not be ignored. And sitting right at the center of that picture was Robyn Brown. For years, Robyn had been the angel of the Brown family. On TV, she was the crying, loving wife who just longed for peace. She cried when there was a fight, hugged when others fought, and talked quietly about her visions of peace. Fans loved her, or suspected her. But Kody loved her. "She knows me," he would say. "She gives the most. She's my rock." Those words, uttered so many times, had become daggers to the other wives. How could they compete with Robyn's halo? No matter what they did, no matter how they tried, Kody always seemed to find fault with them, while Robyn could do nothing wrong. But behind closed doors, that wasn't the case. Janelle's lawsuit presented evidence that indicated Robyn wasn't simply the favorite, she had been the tactician. Bank transfers, deeds to property, joint accounts that were suddenly depleted. Favoritism wasn't all that it was manipulation. As soon as the attorneys put the documents forward, the whole courtroom became silent. Page after page of financial reports, pointing to transactions that channeled money into Robyn's business-linked concerns. Money intended to assist all the wives with shelter, schooling, and day-to-day necessities, had instead found different uses. Christine, sitting in the gallery, covered her mouth in shock. Meri's hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. Even the judge raised his eyebrows at the sheer detail of what was being shown. "This can't be true," Kody grunted under his breath, shaking his head furiously. His face was red with rage. and his jaw was clenched tightly in anger. He glared at Robyn, pleading for her to tell him it wasn't true, for her to leap up and shout that it was all a fabrication. But Robyn remained silent. She just sat there, staring wide-eyed, lips pursed, silence speaking louder than any words. And that silence condemned him. The other wives had suspected favoritism. Yes. But never this. Never blunt dishonesty. Christine leaned forward, not able to contain herself. "We knew you were his favorite, Robyn," she spat, her voice cracking. "But this, you were stealing from all of us while we were left with leftovers." Meri's hurt was more subdued, but just as potent. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed. "I thought it was me. I thought I hadn't done enough to make this work. But it wasn't me. It was you. You were the one manipulating all along." And Janelle, the instigator of all this, stood firm. Her gaze never wavered from Kody, her face impassive but firm. She didn't have to scream. The facts would do that for her. Robyn's collapse. When Robyn finally broke her silence, what she said knocked everyone back. She didn't deny it. She didn't even stand up for herself. What she did was play a different card, one that had the room reeling. "I did what I needed to do, to keep my babies safe," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes shone with tears, the kind that used to elicit sympathy, but now elicited only distrust. "You don't understand what it was like. You don't know what I sacrificed. Kody vowed to provide for me and give me security, and I accepted. I couldn't afford to lose everything." Her admission rocked the courtroom. Yes, she confessed. Yes, she had gained, but she positioned it as survival, as motherhood, as need. Kody's head jerked in her direction, his eyes full of shock and betrayal. All these years he had fought for her. All these years he had warred with the other wives on her behalf. And in the very moment that he most needed her, she was admitting her complicity, and yet staying one step away from him. "Robyn," he shouted, his voice ringing. "How dare you say that? After all I've done for you?" But Robyn did not look at him. She gazed down, speechless once more, as if Kody was no longer her protector, but her liability. Outside the courthouse, fans went wild. Social media was ablaze with hashtags. #Robyn exposed #justice. For Janelle #Kody, and Robyn fall years. It had been since viewers had argued back and forth over whether Robyn was manipulative or just misunderstood. Now, with the court papers and her own words, the arguing was done. She was no longer the innocent victim Kody had portrayed. She was the mastermind of favoritism, the lady who sneaked in while others got pushed out. And for the first time, even her defenders were having trouble defending her decisions. Kody, on the other hand, fell apart. His face contorted with rage, his voice thundering across the courtroom. "This is all lies," he bellowed, pounding his fist on the table. "They want to kill me. They want to dismantle everything I've created." But the louder he ranted, the more pitiful he sounded. His accusations had no power against the stark realities. His outbursts only served to accentuate the difference. Janelle's steady resolve set against his explosive denials. And the most humiliating of all, Robyn hadn't stood up for him. Not once. The man who had given her everything, who had isolated his other wives for her sake, now stood alone, crying out into the emptiness while she drew back inch by inch. The clincher came late in the day. As lawyers gathered their files and the judge signaled to recess, Robyn quietly collected her belongings. She waited for no one. She leaned on no one. She didn't even glance in his direction. Journalists descended upon her, calling out questions. "Robyn, do you still back Kody? Robyn, were you involved in this scam? Robyn, do you regret it?" Her only reply was silence. And that silence was louder than any confession could be. Within, Kody remained frozen, looking at the vacant chair Robyn had occupied. His hands trembled. His lips were pressed into a thin line. For the first time in his life, he knew what the other wives had always known. Robyn wasn't his savior. She was his demise. Session 2 doesn't conclude in triumph. It doesn't conclude in resolution. It concludes with betrayal suspended in the air like smoke after flames. The facts are out. Robyn's reputation is in tatters. The wives are aligned in their fury. And Kody, he's left alone, forsaken by the woman who he believed would never let him go. The Brown family cracks are no longer cracks. They're chasms. And in this case, one thing is certain. Only the tip of the iceberg has come to light. Because if Robyn was prepared to betray the others, then what else is lurking in the background? The day had come at last. The Brown family, which had once been paraded in front of the world as a model of plural love and togetherness, was now seated in the one location no one would have ever dreamed. A courtroom. Outside, the tension hummed through the air. Journalists streamed along the stairs. Microphones and cameras poised to snap up every word. Fans and critics surged behind ropes, some carrying support signs for Janelle, others calling for responses from Kody. The courthouse, normally a cold bastion of law and order, was now the set for the most dramatic play in the Brown family drama. And inside, the mood was charged. The judge appeared, his flowing black robe, the gavel banging wood with power. "Court is now in session," he stated, his voice booming through the courtroom. Opposite her sat Janelle Brown and her lawyers, serene but unshakable. Her back was straight, her gaze firm, her face a mask of quiet intensity. She'd spent years being underestimated, being the practical wife who'd never complain. But today she wasn't silent. Today she was a warrior. To his left sat Kody Brown. His cheeks were flushed, his blonde hair rumpled, his jaw set so hard that it appeared as though his teeth would break. His attorneys huddled beside him, talking rapidly, desperately, attempting to soothe the tempest brewing. Kody, however, was not one to keep his cool, not when his ego was on the line. Behind them the wives observed. Christine, eyes snapping and unflinching, sat with folded arms. Meri, grasping a tissue, was pale but determined. And Robyn, silent and withdrawn, kept her stare at the table, not looking up at Kody. The playing field had been established. The charges, the judge used careful words. "Mr. Brown, you are charged with financial mismanagement, favoritism, and irresponsible management of assets intended to serve all stakeholders in your plural family venture. Mrs. Janelle Brown, you are the claimant, charging deceit, betrayal, and misuse of funds. Today, the court will start to get to the bottom of things." Gasps murmured among the audience. The terms deceit and betrayal seemed heavy in the air. Kody leaned forward, his voice thundering. "This is ridiculous. My wives are plotting against me. They're out to ruin everything I accomplished." "Mr. Brown," the judge snapped sternly, "you will hold your peace until it is your time to testify." Kody slumped back in his chair, but his eyes blazed with anger. "Janelle's evidence." Janelle's attorney stood up, her tone cool but venomous. "Your Honor, we offer Exhibit A, comprehensive financial records for the last 7 years. These reports demonstrate habitual patterns of money being redirected into accounts mostly controlled by Robyn Brown. Money allocated for housing, schooling, and family needs was routinely redirected into projects that disproportionately profited Robyn and her family." She presented the pile of documents to the judge. The courtroom erupted. Reporters wrote frantically, cameras popping. Christine shook her head in amazement. "I knew it," she breathed. Meri's lip was quivering. "We hurt while she prospered," she muttered. The judge read through the pages. His brow creased. "These are serious claims," he stated gravely. "Do you have supporting evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Janelle's lawyer answered. "Bank transfers, signed deeds, and affidavit from family members who saw these decisions being made firsthand." Kody's outburst. At that, Kody could no longer restrain himself. He pounded his fist on the table. "This is all lies," he bellowed. His face red with anger, he jabbed his finger across the room at Janelle. "She's bitter, she's jealous. This is her revenge for leaving her behind." The judge's gavel came down on the desk. "Mr. Brown, compose yourself or you will be held in contempt." But Kody wasn't done. He rose to his feet, standing above the table, his voice booming. "I sacrificed everything to this family. Everything, and this is how they reward me. With lawsuits and deception, Robyn was the only one who ever truly cared about me." The statement resonated throughout the courtroom. The wives squirmed in their seats. The audience gasped in shock, and Robyn, seated quietly, winced at the sound of her name. The wives speak. Christine stood up abruptly, no longer able to hold back. "Your Honor, may I have a word?" The judge paused, then nodded. Christine's voice was cold, shaking with years of repressed rage. I lived with that family. I witnessed what went on. I watched Kody devote all his attention to Robyn, while the rest of us starved for crumbs. I saw my kids go without, while Robyn's children got whatever they desired. This isn't jealousy. This is reality. Meri trailed behind, her tone softer but laced with anguish. For years I believed I was the issue. I believed if I worked harder, if I adjusted myself, perhaps he would treat us equally. But I realize now, I was never going to win. None of us were. Robyn was always the priority. The courtroom grew silent. The wives' oneness was unmistakable. Their muted voices now resounded with authority. Robyn on the stand. At last it was Robyn's turn. The judge called her in, and the courtroom waited with bated breath. She moved slowly, her hands together, her face ashen. For all those years, she had been protected by Kody's adoration. But here, under oath, there was no protection. Mrs. Robyn Brown, said the judge sternly, do you deny or admit to being disproportionately benefited from family money? Robyn faltered, her gaze flickered to Kody, and then back to the judge. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go like this, she murmured. I only did what I knew to protect my children. Kody assured me of security, and I believed him. The courtroom gasped. It wasn't a denial, it was a confession disguised as excuses. Kody's jaw fell. Robyn, he shouted. How could you say that? But Robyn didn't answer. She kept her gaze down, refusing to look at him. The judge leaned back in his chair, his face grave. This court will require further examination of these documents and testimonies. But let me make this clear. Favoritism, mismanagement, and the neglect of family members' welfare will not be tolerated if proven true. The truth will come out. His gavel struck once more. Court adjourned. The room erupted in din. Reporters pushed towards the doorways to get out their headlines. Gallery fans hushed angrily. Kody sat paralyzed, his face pale, his hands trembling. The man who once ruled a household of wives and children now seemed small, helpless, and betrayed. Janelle stood, collected her papers, and walked out with her head held high. Christine followed, her arm linked with Meri's. And Robyn? She slipped out quietly, avoiding eye contact, her silence heavier than any admission. The showdown wasn't over, it had only just begun. But the first battle was clear. Kody Brown was no longer untouchable. The courtroom had cleared after the initial explosion of a day, but the echoes of testimony were still hanging in the air. For years, Kody Brown's wives had been opposing each other, pushed into competition, bullied into silence, and torn apart by favoritism. But now, for the first time, something had changed. They were no longer rivals. They were no longer fighting for crumbs of Kody's attention. They were together. And that solidarity frightened him more than any lawsuit ever could. Once court had recessed, Janelle, Christine, and Meri sat in a remote corner room of the courthouse. It wasn't something they had planned. It wasn't even something they had dreamed possible months before. But as they sat there, the gravity of their situation became undeniable. This is bigger than money, Janelle declared, her tone resolute. She had initiated the lawsuit, but now it was evident that she wasn't doing so alone. This is about years of silence, years of being informed that our children did not count as much, years of being made to feel inferior. Christine leaned forward, her eyes burning with conviction. He broke us each individually, Janelle, but he can't break us together. If we are a wall, he won't know how to break us down. Meri, normally reserved and shy, finally found her voice. Her hands shook a little as she talked, but the words came steadily. I felt like I was the weakest. I believed that I deserved what happened to me. But listening there in court to Robyn confess what she'd done, hearing the facts outlined black and white, I realized now it was not me. It was him. It was always him. The three women glanced at one another. Years of pain and betrayal had come between them, but so had something new. Strength. They were no longer ex-wives or estranged partners. They were survivors. They were fighters. Kody's isolation. Robyn trailed behind him silently, as Kody stormed out of the courthouse. His anger was volcanic. Cameras trailed him as he seethed, his voice ringing throughout the parking lot. They're lying. They're jealous. They've always been against me, he yelled at reporters, his hair whipping wildly in the wind. The reporters weren't fooled. The headlines had already been written. Brown wives unite against Kody in courtroom bombshell. Janelle, Christine, and Meri joined forces, Kody left alone. Robyn admits favoritism. Kody's defense crumbles. Even Robyn, his alleged soulmate, followed a few paces behind, her lips pursed, her face white. For once, she didn't come to his defense. She didn't stand by him and dry his tears. She appeared to be a warm wife who had seen she was in support of a sinking ship. Kody noticed it too. And that alienation hurt more than any suit ever could. By the following morning, the news was everywhere. Talk shows broke down the courtroom drama. Social media was flooded with opinions from fans. Some praised Janelle for her courage, others praised Christine for her braveness, and many felt sorry for Meri for finally speaking out. But nearly no one came to Kody's defense. For years the audience had seen him prefer Robyn, gaslight the other wives, and brush aside their hurt. Now the receipts were out, and the world got to see what the wives had been through. A commentator aptly summarized it: "What we're seeing here isn't just the collapse of a marriage, it's the collapse of a kingdom. And the women who once served the king are now rising as queens in their own right." Back in court, the alliance on display, when the court convened again, the mood was different. The wives didn't sit separately, straggling in corners as they had before. They walked in together, side by side, a phalanx of unity. Flashes lit up as they swept through the hallway, their faces firm. Kody saw it right away. His jaw clenched, fists were balled. He grumbled under his breath. "They think they can do this to me, not on your life." But within he was desperate. He had established his authority by division, getting the wives at one another so they could never have their strength together. Now that they stood united, he had nothing left to use as a weapon. Christine's testimony. Christine began first that day. She spoke steadily, but her words held decades of pent-up rage. "I hung in on that marriage way longer than I should have, because I believed in family. But what I witnessed wasn't family. It was favoritism. Kody made it absolutely clear that my children weren't as much as Robyn's. We were forgotten. We were treated like outsiders in our own home, and I'm not going to let him try to rewrite that truth." Her words hit Kody like a hammer. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face twitching with anger. Meri's courage next came Meri. For years she had been the silent one, the wife who endured humiliation and loneliness without speaking out. But in court, she finally shed that silence. "I lived in shame," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I believed that if I prayed more, worked harder, perhaps he would come back to me. But I see now, I was never going to be good enough for him. Because Robyn was always the one and only that he desired." Her voice trembled, but her words remained strong. The courtroom was quiet, everyone hearing a woman who had long been silenced. Kody hung his head, not wanting to see her. Janelle's final blow. Then Janelle spoke again, the woman who had begun it all. Her tone was even, professional, but it was laced with steel. "Revenge or jealousy. This case is not about either of those things. It's about responsibility. It's about the children who suffered when some were treated differently. It's about justice. It's about honesty." Kody made decisions, and now he has to suffer the repercussions of those decisions. The judge nodded solemnly. The solidarity of the wives was palpable. Their attestations aligned like arrows aimed directly at Kody's chest. Kody's breakdown. Finally it was Kody's turn. He stood up from his chair, pacing back and forth like a wild animal in a cage. His voice was boisterous, desperate, almost crazed. "They're all against me," he bellowed. "This is a setup. Robyn is the only one who's ever loved me. These women are bitter, angry, and jealous because they couldn't take the truth." But the courtroom did not witness a man defending himself. They witnessed a man disintegrating. His words were not firm. They were desperate. His accusations were unconvincing. They were pathetic. And the worst part, Robyn did not come to his defense. She sat in silence, her pale face, her downcast eyes. By evening the tide had fully turned. The wives had discovered their voices, and the world heard them. Kody had ranted, yelled, and blamed, but it only served to make him appear weaker. As the gavel came down and the court recessed, the wives walked out once more as a group, a single front. The cameras snapped, Preserving the moment, three women once shattered now standing tall, shoulder to shoulder. Kody appeared a few minutes later, by himself. No reporters hounded him. No fans applauded. He was a man with no power, no wives, and no pride. The solidarity of the wives was the beginning of a new chapter. For years Kody had dominated them like a monarch, splitting and conquering. But in court, they had discovered something more powerful than his manipulation each other. And as they entered the sunset of that evening, one reality was certain: the king was declining, while the queens ascended. The courtroom was heavy with tension. Weeks of hearings, testimony, and exposure had stripped away every illusion Kody Brown had fought so hard to preserve. What had been viewed as a kingdom of wives and children, founded on love and faith, had proved to be something else: a regime of control, favoritism, and betrayal. Judgment time was now. Newspaper reporters filled the courthouse steps that morning. The tale had transcended reality television drama. It was now a national news headline. People gathered with signs, some in favor of Janelle, Christine, and Meri, while others called for Kody to be held accountable. Inside, the wives arrived together once again. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing day of testimony. Janelle's determination, Christine's fiery truth-telling, and Meri's newfound courage had become a shield of unity. Kody came minutes later with Robyn following quietly behind. His former proud stance had collapsed. His shoulders slumped, his face etched with fatigue. His eyes flicked uncertainly around the room, seeking supporters, but there were none. Even Robyn, his final bastion of support, seemed aloof, her eyes shunning his. The stage was set for judgment. The judge walked in, and the courtroom went silent. Papers shuffled before him, his expression somber. When he spoke at last, his words sliced like a knife. "This court has heard weeks of testimony. We have reviewed the evidence, the books, the deeds, and the transfers. We have heard the voices of women who for years were silenced by the favoritism of one man." The words sat in the room. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands clenched tightly. The judge went on. "What you have here is not just a matter of financial mismanagement. It's a matter of trust, of manipulation, and of neglect. Mr. Brown, you had a system where you favored one wife and her children over the others, leaving the rest of your family to suffer. This court does not suffer such disparity when legal responsibilities and common resources are at stake." Gasps filled the courtroom. Christine cried tears of joy. Meri held Janelle's hand. The truth was finally being uttered, by a person Kody could no longer shut up. Kody's desperation. Kody sprang to his feet, his voice shaking with anger. "This isn't fair. They're lying. They've always been against me. I gave everything to this family. Everything." His voice trembled. He glared at Robyn, anticipating her to rise, to finally stand up for him as she always did. But Robyn remained seated. Her hands were knotted in her lap, her eyes locked on the ground. "Robyn," Kody yelled, his voice desperate, "say something, tell them the truth." She slowly raised her head, her lips quivered, her eyes brimming with tears. But when she finally spoke, the words devastated him. "I can't defend this anymore, Kody," she barely breathed. "You swore to give us security, and instead you only brought devastation." The room fell silent in shock. Kody stumbled back into his chair, as if physically hit. For the first time he knew, he was really alone. The gavel came down once, shutting the din. "This court finds for the plaintiff, Janelle Brown. Mr. Brown, you are hereby convicted of financial impropriety and careless management of family wealth. Restitution will be made to those who were adversely affected, and all joint property is to be equally divided among the wives. Additionally, any legal authority you exercised over their finances or personal belongings is hereby abolished." The gavel slammed again. It was done. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Christine let out a breath she had been holding for years, tears streaming freely as she hugged Janelle. Meri, once the quietest, sobbed openly, finally freed from the shadow of inadequacy she had carried for decades. Janelle stood tall, her features unruffled, her expression one of quiet triumph. She hadn't merely won a lawsuit, she had reclaimed her voice. The three women, once shattered by Kody's favoritism, left the courtroom arm in arm, united, stronger than ever before. Separate. Kody's collapse. Kody sat there, aghast. His complexion was pale, his eyes glazed, his posture slumped, like a man who had just lost not only a case but his identity. He had spent decades constructing his universe based on control. Control over his wives, over the money, over the story of their family. But now that control had been taken away from him in front of the world, he looked at Robyn, seeking comfort, seeking reassurance. But she was already headed for the door, her face smeared with tears, her shoulders slumped in shame. She did not look back. And then it came to him. The truth: the empire he had constructed was lost. And the woman he had given everything for had abandoned him to deal with the ruin alone. The steps of the courthouse were a river of cameras and microphones. The wives came out first, and they were met with applause and cheers of encouragement. Christine spoke up to the reporters. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. About finally being heard. Meri continued, her voice firm though she was crying. For years I felt as though I was invisible. But today I know I matter. We all matter. And Janelle, the woman who had ignited the fire, concluded with words that would resound long beyond the courthouse. This isn't just a victory for us. This is a victory for every woman who has ever been silenced. For every wife who was told she wasn't enough. For every mother who fought for her children and was ignored. Today we showed that truth always wins. The audience cheered. Hashtags started trending within minutes. #justice for the wives, #Kody falls. #queens. Rise Kody's walk of shame. A few minutes later, Kody emerged from the courthouse. Stumbling, the cheers changed to boos, the flashes popping like thunder. Reporters fired questions at him. Kody, do you regret your decisions? Kody, how do you react to the verdict? Kody, is Sister Wives over? But he had no responses. He kept his head down, his pace slow. The man who had once paraded with pride now resembled a deposed king, bereft of his crown, empire and dignity. The symbolic end. That evening, while the news showed reruns of the trial, fans all over the globe pondered what they had just seen. It wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the end of a myth. Kody said he was a leader, a husband, a father. But in the courtroom he had been exposed as a man brought down by his own pride, his own favoritism, his own decisions. And what about the wives? They were not sister wives anymore. They were survivors, conquerors, women who had taken back their strength. The judge's words had condemned Kody, but the solidarity of the wives was the blow that had finally killed him. The king had fallen, the queens rose, and the world, watching, heard one truth ring out louder than any gavel. Empires founded on deceit are bound to fall, yet truth persists infinitely.